Apex Stallion Ratings. APEX stands for Annual Progeny Earnings Index. We created Apex Stallion Ratings at Racing Update in the early 1990s. And the reason we did it is because the existing stallion ratings were not then and still are not now sufficient to really describe how good sires are. Everybody's familiar, of course, with the progeny tables where stallions are rated just on the amount of earnings, the amount of money their progeny earned. And in the early 1950s at the Blood Horse, a man called Joe Estes came up with what's called the Average Earnings Index, where you take all the runners by all the sires, for example, in North America, you divide the earnings by the number of runners, and let's say it comes out to $5,000 per runner. If Stallion A has $10,000 per runner, then he has a 2.00 average earnings index. This is all great. It was an advance, but it has one problem that really can't be overcome, which is when a horse wins $20 million in one race. The apex ratings are a variation on the average earnings index and an enhancement of them, because one huge earner does not distort the sire statistics. And the reason is because the apex ratings calculate the frequency with which a sire's horses who are in the top 2% of earners to runners in a given jurisdiction in a given year. What we do is we again take the total earnings and you have the earnings per horse. So you take the total earnings of all runners in, let's say, North America, and let's say there's 25,000 runners in North America in a year. So you take the top 2% of those runners, which would be 500, and those become A runners. Then you take the next 2%, and those are called B runners, and the next 4% are called C runners, so A, B, C, and then we combine those three to get a top 8%, which we call ABC runners. Now, as things work out, C runners are basically horses who break even or do a little bit better on their training costs, not to mention what it costs to buy them, but on their training costs. So the step ladder is C, B, A, and the A runners, which are the top 2% of earners, are the best horses, the horses that earn the most money in a jurisdiction in a given year. So let's say it's America. In 2024, I believe the A runner threshold was something like $180,000. So you count the number of runners the horse had and the number of earners who made $180,000 or more, whatever the figure happened to be. So say he had 50 runners and he had 4 runners that made $180,000 or more. Well, that's 8% of his runners. You divide the 8% by the 2% and you have a 4.00 A runner index. So that's how the apex figures improve on the average earnings index. Now, there's a couple of other things we do with apex ratings which are different than taking the whole population of all runners by all sires. One of the limitations that we use is we limit the statistics to the previous 7 years, including the year that we're studying. And we do that for one essential reason, one basic reason, which is that sires who were once great and then start to tail off. We didn't used to understand really why they tailed off. Some tail off more than others. But as we've developed the SSR project, we've learned why stallions' statistics tail off as they get older. And it's pretty simple. They just tail off as they get older. But nonetheless, the 7-year bandwidth, if you will, captures what has been happening in the most recent times as opposed to a stallion's whole career. The other thing we do that is a limitation on the entire population is we do not assign apex ratings to sires who have fewer than an average of 10 foals per crop or fewer than 20 what are called year starters, which is if a horse runs 1 year, it's 1 year starter. If he runs the second year, he's a second-year starter. So the same horse can be up to 7-year starters in the Apex method. That's same as with the average earnings index. That's how it works when you're dealing with annualized figures. You have to be able to do it on an annual basis. And for example, the mighty Winx in Australia counted as 6A runners for Street Cry because she achieved the A runner threshold in 6 separate seasons. But generally, to the effect of restricting it to stallions who have had an average of 10 or more foals is that we eliminate the bottom 20% of stallions and the bottom third of foals, and we end up having a figure which is much more applicable to the real commercial market in which people are operating. We would do a comparison of a horse's average earnings index with their A runner index, for example, and we would find that in the unrestricted world, where you take all runners by all sires, a stallion might come out with a 1.40 average earnings index, which makes him look like an above average stallion. But the same stallion actually would have a 1.01 A runner index when we eliminate those two categories, meaning he actually is an average stallion. And we have found over the 30 years that we've done Apex ratings that our Apex ratings, the A runner index, is a far more accurate guide to a horse's actual commercial performance than the average earnings index or indeed the progeny earnings tables.